There's a man you've been taught to love. You've worn his face on a t-shirt. You've quoted him at the gym. You think he died for freedom. Stay with me for a few minutes, and I'll show you what he actually was, because I was standing in the olive grove the night they made him, and I was standing at the hot gates the day he died. Same man, both times. Let me tell you what happened in between. His kingdom had a problem. A few thousand warriors ruled over a slave population that outnumbered them, by some ancient estimates, as much as 7 to 1. Do the math on that. You are one man in a house with 7 people who hate you, 7 people whose children you starve so your children can eat. So how do you sleep at night? You don't. You make sure they don't either. That answer, the thing Sparta built to solve that one problem, is the thing that built Leonidas. And it has a name. Hold on to it, because everything turns on it. I'm Zoru. I don't age. I don't forget. And I've watched humanity dress up its monsters in armor and call them heroes more times than you've had birthdays. This one was my favorite lie. Let me unwind it. Picture a teenage boy, the best of his class, top of the Agoge, the brutal state school every Spartan boy was thrown into at 7, ripped from his mother, taught to steal food and beaten not for stealing, but for getting caught. But before they ever hand him that dagger, they spend years hollowing him out. One cloak, that's his whole wardrobe. One thin cloak, summer and winter, for a year. He sleeps on a bed of reeds he rips from the riverbank with his bare hands, because they won't give him a blade to cut them. They keep him hungry, deliberately, always one meal short of enough. And here's the part that tells you everything, that hunger has a purpose. They want him to steal food. They're training him to. But if he gets caught stealing, they whip him, bloody. He's not whipped for stealing. He's whipped for getting caught. The lesson isn't don't take what isn't yours. The lesson is don't get seen. They're not raising a thief. They're raising something that moves in the dark and leaves no trace. Now you tell me, what job is that the perfect training for? Now picture the graduation. They hand him a dagger, a little food, and they send him out into the countryside alone. His assignment has a name. The Greeks called it the Krypteia, from their word for hidden. His job? Hide by day, move by night, and kill the slaves. Now, you already know how this works, don't you? A regime that wants to keep slaves in line goes after the weak ones, the troublemakers. Make an example of the broken man so the rest stay broken. That's the prediction. And it's wrong. The Krypteia hunted the strongest ones. Sit with why that's worse. You don't kill the strong to make examples. You kill the strong so there's no one left who could ever stand up straight and say enough. They weren't punishing slaves. They were performing surgery on a population, cutting out every future leader before he could be born into the role. And the truly cold part is that it was legal. Every single year, Sparta's rulers performed a ritual. The ephors, the 5 elected magistrates, would take office and formally declare war on their own slaves. A legal declaration of war on unarmed farmers, renewed annually. You understand what that does? It means killing a slave wasn't murder. The gods didn't count it. A Spartan could open a man's throat in a wheat field and walk home with clean hands and a clean soul. I stood in those fields. I watched the wheat. I watched what fell into it. Now, quick truth, because the storytellers usually skip it. We can't prove Leonidas personally ran the Krypteia as a boy. Plutarch, our main source, suspected the death squads came after Leonidas was already dead, but that's almost worse. Whether or not he held the dagger, this was the air he breathed, the only logic, the only world he knew had ever run on, a world with no word for mercy. And then they named that world Leonidas, Which raises the question that should be bothering you by now. A man shaped by this, how does he even end up wearing a crown? The answer is uglier than the crown. Here's what the movie will never tell you. Leonidas was never supposed to be king. He was a third son, third in line, a spare to the spare, and in Sparta, that meant something specific. The heir to the throne skipped the Agoge. A third son didn't. So this future king went through the whole machine, the hunger, the whip, the dagger, every cut. So picture the man that produces. Hardened, yes, but humbled, maybe. The one king who actually knew what the bottom felt like. You'd expect that to soften him. You'd expect the underdog who clawed up to rule a little gentler. Hold that prediction, because first, here's how he got the throne. It wasn't conquest. His brothers just ran out. Darius, the golden one everyone assumed should be king, sailed off in a rage to found a colony and got himself killed in Sicily. The eldest, Cleomenes, brilliant, ambitious, and by the end stark mad, died in a cell with a blade in his own hands. Or so they said. Sparta was very good at deaths that said one thing and meant another, and just like that, around 489 BC, the spare to the spare put on the crown, not the chosen one, the last one standing. Now, that humbled, gentler king you were picturing, the first thing he upheld every year of his reign was the annual declaration of war on the slaves. The legal hunt. He didn't soften it. He didn't end it. He signed it. The boy the machine forged grew up to be the man who turned the crank. And I can tell you exactly what that machine was capable of because I watched it work. Years later, after Leonidas, but pure Sparta, the state got nervous about its strongest slaves, so it made an offer. Any helot who'd fought bravely could step forward and earn his freedom. 2,000 men came forward. They were crowned with garlands. They were paraded through the streets as free men at last. And then every single one of them vanished. You see the trick? By stepping forward to claim freedom, those 2,000 men had identified themselves as the bravest, the most ambitious, the exact men who might one day lead a revolt. So the state thanked them with flowers and murdered them in the dark. That's the system Leonidas kept alive with his signature, not a relic he inherited, a live machine he fed. The product had become the perpetrator, and that machine wasn't finished with him. It had one more thing to make him do. The coldest decision of his life, and the one the world chose to carve into stone and love him for. I'll show you exactly what it was. But first, let me step out of the story for a second. I've told this tale in 100 languages to soldiers around campfires that burned out 2,000 years ago, to kids on trains who didn't know they were listening to something older than their country. And every time I wonder the same thing. Who's hearing it this time? So I'm genuinely curious. Drop it in the comments. What city, what country are you watching from right now? I want to see how far this story has traveled. I have a strange feeling it's reached somewhere even I haven't walked. Prove me right. And if you want to walk the rest of history with me, the monsters, the liars, the ones they carved into marble, subscribe. I'm not going anywhere. I literally can't. Now. That decision I promised you. Let me show you how he chose who would die with him. When the Persians came, Xerxes, with an army so large the ancient writers couldn't count it without lying, let me make that army real for you, because large doesn't cover it. Xerxes had to cross the sea to reach Greece, a strait nearly a mile wide, so he didn't sail around it. He bridged it. He lashed hundreds of warships together side by side, 2 full bridges of boats, and marched an empire across the water on a road that floated. And when the first bridge was torn apart by a storm. He had the engineers beheaded. Then, he ordered his men to whip the sea. 300 lashes, chains thrown into the water, a king punishing the ocean for disobeying him. That's who was coming. Not just a big army, a man who believed the world itself answered to him. The ancient writers said his force was millions. They were lying. It was likely closer to 200,000 or 300,000. But stand in its path, and the difference doesn't matter. Either number ends you. Sparta faced a choice, and Sparta had a festival. I'm not joking. The Carneia, a sacred festival during which Spartans were forbidden to march to war. The largest invasion in living memory was rolling toward them, and the law said, not yet, the gods are busy, so they compromised. They sent a token force ahead, 300 men under Leonidas, to hold the line until the real army could come. But which 300? The strongest? The most loyal? The most eager for glory? None of those. He picked by a different rule entirely. Every man chosen had a living son. The Romantics call that moving. I call it what it is, inventory management. He looked at 300 men, confirmed their bloodlines would survive without them, and marked them as the lives the state could most afford to spend, not volunteers chasing glory. The ones who'd already done their reproductive duty to Sparta, used, filed, expendable. And the cold arithmetic didn't stop with his own men, because there were 400 others he brought to that pass, and the reason he brought them is darker still. 400 men from Thebes. History remembers them as allies. History is being polite. Herodotus, the man who actually wrote this down, tells us Leonidas didn't trust the Thebans. He suspected they'd defect to the Persians the moment his back was turned, so he kept them close enough that they couldn't run. Think about that line. A hero chooses who stands beside him. Leonidas chose who couldn't leave. For 2 days, it worked. The pass was narrow. The Persians poured in and died in heaps, their numbers useless against a wall of bronze in a corridor of stone, and then the knife in the back. Here's how the wall held. Day 1, Xerxes sent in the Medes. Wave after wave of them funneled into a gap so tight their numbers meant nothing. The Greeks locked shields, the Phalanx, a single wall of bronze bristling with spears, and the Medes broke against it like surf on rock. Their arrows? Useless. Their cavalry? Couldn't even enter the pass, and the Spartans did something almost cruel in how clever it was. They'd turn and run, fake a panic, a broken retreat. The Persians, smelling victory, would surge after them out of formation, and the Spartans would stop on a coin, wheel around, reform that wall in a heartbeat, and cut the chasing mob to pieces. Day 2, Xerxes lost patience. He sent in the Immortals, his personal guard, 10,000 of the finest soldiers the empire owned, the units so feared they were named for the idea they could never fall. Same pass, same wall, same result. 2 days, the greatest army on earth, and it could not move 300 men out of a gap in the rocks. It would take treachery to do what the whole Persian army couldn't. Not Persian. Greek, a local man named Ephialtes. He knew a hidden mountain path that curled around behind the Greek line, and he sold it to Xerxes for gold. By morning, Leonidas knew. He was surrounded. The battle was lost. So he did the thing that built the legend. He dismissed the army, sent thousands home to fight another day. And here is where the myth gets its makeup ripped off. The movie wants you to believe 300 Spartans stood alone against the world. They didn't. 2 other groups stayed, the 400 Thebans, the ones who couldn't leave, and 700 men from a small city called Thespiae. Now feel the difference between those 2 groups. Really feel it. The Spartans were bred to die there, programmed from age 7. Death in battle was the only success their culture recognized. They had no choice. The Agoge had erased the part of them that could choose. The Thespians? Free men. No death cult, no state-issued daggers in their childhood. Their city lay directly in the Persian path. They were fighting for their actual homes, their actual families, and they volunteered to die in that pass. So here's what I've watched history do for 2,000 years. 700 men chose to die there, freely, for love. 300 men were selected to die there by calculation because they were expendable. And history remembers the ones who had no choice. We gave the t-shirts to the products of the machine. We forgot the only truly free men on that field. Leonidas fell, early actually, not in some final cinematic duel, but somewhere in the grinding middle of the slaughter. The Greeks fought 4 times over his corpse just to drag it back, and when it was over, when the last of them died under a sky black with Persian arrows, Xerxes did something the Spartans would have understood perfectly. He cut off Leonidas's head and impaled his body. I want you to sit in that. The king who built his whole world on terror, on hunting the strong, on heads in the dark, on bodies in the wheat, ended as a head on a Persian spike, a terror symbol for someone else's empire. The machine that ate so many people finally ate the man who fed it. It always does. I've never once seen it fail to. I've watched humanity clean this story up for 20 centuries. You took a kingdom that declared annual war on its own slaves and turned it into the inspiration for every underdog who ever refused to quit. You took a system that murdered 2,000 men for the crime of being brave enough to want freedom, and you put its king on a poster in a teenager's bedroom. The irony would be funny if I didn't remember the wheat fields. Here's the truth I've carried since that olive grove. Leonidas wasn't a hero who happened to be monstrous. He was a monster who happened to be useful. Sparta aimed him at a mountain pass and called it glory. 3,000 years later, you aimed a camera at the same pass and called it freedom. But understand, I'm not here to take your hero. I'm here to show you something heavier than a hero, because the most dangerous monsters in history were never the ones who looked like monsters. They were the ones so perfectly shaped by a brutal world that their cruelty looked like courage. They were brave, they were disciplined, they died for something, and every one of those virtues was built on top of somebody's grave. That's not a Spartan problem. That's a human problem. You've got Leonidas walking your world right now, admired, decorated, quoted, and the wheat fields they came from just don't make the highlight reel. I watched what they did to that boy when he was young, and I watched what that boy did at the hot gates when he was old. It was the same thing. It was always going to be the same thing. They just needed a Persian army to make you forget how he was made.